China's new invention could make petrol cars a thing of the past. For over 100 years, one thing kept electric cars from truly replacing petrol cars: range and cost. You had to choose. Cheap car, short range, long range, expensive battery. China just quietly broke that trade-off, and it did it twice from two completely different directions at the same time. Solid-state EV batteries are now rolling out in China, and they're promising nearly 1,000 miles of range on a single charge. That's not a concept car sitting in some lab, wheeled out for a press photo and never seen again. That's a real technology moving toward mass production right now, on a public timeline, with a named manufacturer behind it. And it's only half the story, because while one Chinese battery breakthrough is chasing extreme range, another is chasing something even more disruptive, making the battery itself dirt cheap, using a material so common you could scoop it out of the ocean. This is the story of how petrol cars might lose their last two real advantages within the same handful of years, and why almost nobody outside China is talking about it yet. For decades, petrol cars survived one argument that electric cars simply couldn't beat: total cost and convenience. Gas is everywhere. Fill-ups take 5 minutes. You never have to plan a road trip around where the next charger might be, and even as EVs got faster, quieter, and more comfortable than gas cars in almost every other way, the batteries inside them relied on one stubborn weak point: lithium. Lithium is expensive. It's geographically limited, mined in only a handful of countries, and its price has swung wildly over the past decade based on politics, supply shocks, and speculation. That single dependency shaped the entire EV industry from the ground up. Every automaker on Earth, from Detroit to Germany to China itself, has spent the last several years racing to find a way around that bottleneck. China found two ways around it. At the same time, the first breakthrough is about range. Chinese automaker Chang'an said it aims to begin installing solid-state batteries in vehicles for validation this year, scaling up to full mass production by 2027. Solid-state batteries work by removing the liquid electrolyte inside a normal lithium-ion cell, the sloshing chemical soup that ions have to swim through every time the battery charges or discharges. Get rid of that liquid, replace it with a solid material, and you can pack dramatically more energy into the same physical space without making the battery bigger, heavier, or more dangerous. The result is the kind of range number that used to only exist in press release fantasy: close to 1,000 miles on a single charge. For comparison, most gasoline cars on the road today get somewhere between 300 and 500 miles per tank before needing a refill. China isn't just closing the range gap that's haunted EVs since day one. It's about to blow straight past it and turn range anxiety from a real concern into a genuinely outdated complaint. The second breakthrough is about cost, and this is where it gets even more interesting, because it attacks the exact weakness that's kept EV prices stubbornly high. Unlike lithium, which is rare and mined in only a handful of countries, sodium is cheap and found almost everywhere on the planet, including seawater. Sodium-ion batteries work on the same basic principle as lithium-ion batteries, ions shuttling back and forth between two electrodes to store and release energy, but they swap out the expensive, geopolitically fragile metal for one of the most abundant elements on Earth. Chinese battery giants KTL and BYD have invested heavily in sodium-ion technology. KTL launched its Naxtra sodium-ion product line and says it has already started manufacturing at scale, not as a pilot project but as a real commercial product line, sitting alongside its existing lithium business. And this isn't a lab demo sitting years away from anyone's driveway. By the middle of this year, Chang'an, a state-owned Chinese automaker that also partners with Ford Motor Company, began selling models fitted with sodium-ion batteries from CATL, the world's dominant EV battery manufacturer by volume. CATL's chief technology officer said innovations have increased the energy density of sodium batteries by 50%, calling it a milestone moment for the technology, and confirmed mass production beginning by the final quarter of this year. To put KTL's scale in perspective, the company installed over 29 gigawatt-hours of EV batteries in a single month this year, commanding nearly half of the entire national market for battery installations. This is not a startup chasing a niche. This is the single largest battery supplier on the planet, formally adding a second, cheaper battery chemistry to its production lines and shipping it in real cars people are buying today. They've even tested it in the harshest conditions on Earth, the exact conditions that have always been used to argue EVs aren't ready for widespread adoption. In February, engineers put Chang'an's sodium battery SUVs and a battery-powered coupe through icy roads and snow-covered slopes in temperatures as low as -30°C out in a ski region in Inner Mongolia. Cold weather has always been one of the most damaging arguments against EVs, because low temperatures can sap range and charging speed on conventional lithium batteries. If sodium batteries genuinely hold up at -30, in real winter conditions and not a climate-controlled lab, that argument starts to disappear too. And with it, one of the last regions of the world where gas cars still had an obvious practical edge. It's not staying small-scale either, and it's not limited to passenger cars. Outside the city of Tianjin in China's Hubei province, a sodium-ion battery station the size of 15 soccer fields has been quietly feeding a regional power grid, storing enough power for 12,000 homes since 2024. This is a technology that's already left the lab and is running inside the actual energy grid people depend on every single day, powering homes long before most people outside China had even heard the term sodium-ion battery. And it's spreading into smaller vehicles too. Scooter maker Yadea has launched multiple models running on sodium-ion power, and cities including Shenzhen have started piloting battery swapping stations built specifically for sodium-ion packs, aimed at commuters and delivery drivers who need to swap a battery in seconds rather than wait around for a charge. So what happens when a single country controls both the cheapest possible battery chemistry and the longest range battery chemistry at the same time? It changes the entire calculation for petrol cars, because it attacks both of the arguments that have kept gas vehicles alive this long. The reason gas cars have survived this long isn't nostalgia. It's math. Petrol is convenient. Batteries have been expensive, and range anxiety is real. Solid-state batteries attack the range problem head-on. Sodium-ion batteries attack the cost problem head-on. Put those two developments together, running in parallel out of the same country, and the two biggest reasons anyone still buys a gas car over an EV start collapsing at the same time, instead of one slow improvement at a time like the industry has seen for the last 15 years. China isn't treating any of this as a side project or a research curiosity. According to a fresh announcement from China's Ministry of Finance, lithium-ion batteries will face a new consumption tax starting September 1st this year, rising again the year after, ending an exemption that had stood for more than a decade and helped Chinese battery makers scale into the dominant global suppliers they are today. That's widely read as a deliberate signal. China's government considers lithium-ion mature enough now to tax it like any other commoditized product, while it clears the runway for sodium-ion and solid-state batteries to become the new national priority. China has used this exact playbook before. Pick a future technology, subsidize and prioritize it at breakneck pace until the rest of the world is forced to follow just to stay competitive, and a decade later, own the entire global supply chain from raw material to finished component. That's exactly what happened with lithium-ion batteries starting back in 2015. A decade later, China became the undisputed global leader in both the raw materials and the components for that technology. Now, according to industry analysts, it's running the same playbook again, one generation ahead of everyone else, before rivals have even finished catching up on the last one. Independent researchers have started confirming these aren't just marketing claims either, which matters because state-backed announcements out of any country deserve scrutiny before anyone takes them at face value. A widely used sodium-ion battery developed by Chinese manufacturer Hina was found to match key performance benchmarks set by Tesla's own lithium-ion batteries. According to research published in a peer-reviewed cell press journal, scientists tore down and tested the cells under real-world conditions, across a range of temperatures and currents, and found manufacturing quality on par with one of the most respected battery makers in the world. That's not a Chinese company claiming victory in its own press release. That's outside researchers checking the actual math and landing on the same conclusion anyway. It's worth noting this race isn't happening in a vacuum, and China isn't the only country chasing next-generation battery chemistry. American companies are working on similar problems from different angles. One U.S. solid-state battery maker provided cells for a Mercedes test vehicle that reportedly drove over 745 miles on a single charge, and another prominent American solid-state battery company is testing its cells with automotive partners aiming for commercial production later this decade. But the pattern so far has been the same one that played out with lithium-ion a decade ago. Western companies developing promising lab results and multi-year roadmaps, while Chinese manufacturers move straight from announcement to actual cars, on actual roads being sold to actual customers in the same calendar year. Think about what this means for the average driver trying to decide between a gas car and an EV, because that's ultimately who all of this technology is racing to convince. Right now, someone cross-shopping those two options weighs two questions. Can I afford the battery? And will I run out of charge before I run out of road? A sodium-ion battery answers the first question by cutting the most expensive, most volatile part of the entire supply chain out of the equation. A solid-state battery answers the second question by pushing range past what most petrol tanks can even deliver in the first place. Neither of these technologies needed to be perfect to change the conversation. They just needed to be good enough, cheap enough, and real enough to actually ship. And right now, in China, they're already shipping. This is why petrol cars are facing something different than anything they've faced before. It's not one clever EV startup with a flashy prototype and an uncertain production timeline. It's an entire country running two battery revolutions in parallel, backing both with state policy, tax incentives, and manufacturing scale that no single company anywhere else on Earth can match on its own. Every time the West has assumed China would hit a ceiling on battery innovation, that ceiling has moved somewhere further out. First, it was lithium-ion dominance built over the better part of a decade. Now it's whatever comes after lithium, arriving on a timeline measured in months rather than years. The last argument for keeping a gas car in the garage was always range and cost. China just spent the last 2 years quietly building the technology to take both of those arguments away at the same time, testing it in freezing mountain roads, plugging it into real power grids, and putting it into cars people are already driving off dealership lots. The only question left is how fast the rest of the world can catch up, and how many more of these breakthroughs are already sitting in a Chinese factory right now, waiting for their own announcement date.